start whenever your pleasure.
Long record again, we'll call this hearing to order. We're here today for the appeal of Richard Kerns. Am I pronouncing that correctly, sir? Okay, let's see if I can get it right again. Represented by counsel. Before we start, just go around the table and introduce ourselves and give our names to the record. Right on my left.
Benton Wood, I'm here on behalf of the board as their counsel.
Joey Alexander.
Patrick Lane.
Brenda Ball. Brenda Thompson.
It's Al Reeves.
I'm Michael Moore, here on behalf of Volusia County, and I have with me Mr. Mark Flowers, who's the director of the Division of Corrections in the Volusia County Branch Jail, and next to him is Mr. Terry Sanders, who's the director of the Department of Public Protection.
Yes, I'm David Glasser. I'm here for Mr. Kerns.
All right, well, we'll proceed then directly. I'll start with a brief opening statement from your side and then the county. Before we interrupt, as we're out of order, do we have anybody in the room that's going to testify later on?
Mr. Chairman, we have two witnesses, so we should probably swear the witnesses and then we'll ask our witness to leave, and then as soon as we're done with opening, I'll ask him to come back.
Let's do that. If anybody's in the room that's going to testify, would you stand up and be sworn in, please?
Gentlemen, please stand up. And,
Just trying to say, well, it doesn't save much time. It's kind of what we do. You raise your hand and repeat after me. In the matter before us today, do you hereby solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you very much. Be seated. And Mark.
Mr. Flowers, I'll ask you to step out. Mr. Sanders is my agency representative, and yes, sir, thank you. Good morning, Mayor, Police Board. I'm Michael Moore, I'm the Assistant County Attorney here from Volusia County. Today I'm representing the County of Volusia, the Department of Public Protection, and the Division of Corrections that we will sometimes refer to as the Volusia County Branch Jail. As set forth in the notice of dismissal dated September 14, 2016, this is an appeal of the dismissal of the appellant Richard Kerns' employment as a senior corrections officer with the Volusia County Department of Public Protection and its Division of Corrections. This case is about Mr. Kerns' frequent absence from duty without prior approval. The evidence you will hear will show that Mr. Kerns was dismissed after a recent administrative review showed patterns of unexcused absences. The notice of dismissal contains references to a number of prior disciplinary actions against Mr. Kerns for exactly the same thing, that is, an absence from duty without prior approval. The evidence will show that most recently, Mr. Kerns' absences demonstrate two patterns. One where he is absent from duty the day before a scheduled day off. That'd be like our Friday, if you work on a Monday through Friday schedule. And another pattern where he is absent from duty during a day, during a pay period, during which he also works overtime. The evidence will show that he has repeated these patterns over a course of time, over a course of years, really. The evidence will show that an unscheduled absence of a corrections officer at the Volusia County Branch Jail presents adverse effects to the operations at the branch jail, and you will hear testimony about these adverse effects. The evidence will also show that Mr. Kerns has been a corrections officer since 2001. The evidence will show that throughout his employment, Mr. Kerns' performance has suffered as a result of his absenteeism, as you might expect. And further, that his employee performance evaluations do not warrant negating his termination. The evidence will also show that in comparison to other corrections officers, Mr. Kerns has not been treated less favorably. Most significantly, the evidence will show that on June 17, 2015, Mr. Kerns was issued a notice of intent to dismiss. That's almost a year and a half ago. That notice of dismissal was reduced to a suspension. It was in effect given another opportunity to keep his job. On account of his absenteeism, the county first sought to terminate Mr. Kerns, but gave him a break. Notwithstanding this break, the evidence will show that within 6 months, Mr. Kerns relapsed into his old patterns of unscheduled absences without prior notice. The evidence will also show that, independent of the suspension in lieu of termination for his absenteeism, he also had received a suspension of 4 days for insubordination in January of 2016, earlier this year. After you've heard the testimony and seen the evidence, I'll come back and summarize the evidence, and at that time ask you to make findings of fact supported by the evidence that we have presented to you, and request that you uphold the termination and dismissal of Richard Kerns as a senior corrections officer from his employment with the Volusia County Department of Public Protection.
Mr. Glasser.
Yes, thank you. Good morning. My name is David Glasser. I'm a lawyer, as we all know, and I'm here to speak on behalf of Mr. Kerns, who's going to be sitting here on my right. He is going to be testifying here today. Mr. Kerns has been a correctional officer for Volusia County for 15 years, since 2001. He is what we call a supervisory correctional officer. He's held that position. He supervises inmates over here right on 92 at the Volusia County Branch Jail in the facility where we know where the supervision of inmates is just what it is. You have to watch the inmates and what they're doing, maintain them, etc. He's going to describe his job duties. He was, in August of 2016, presented with the notice of his position. He was suspended from his job without pay. They indicated that it was for excessive absences. I'm sure we're going to hear all about this during this hearing. The county indicated that he had 4 absences, and they work on what's called a rolling period. In other words, within a year of the day you're absent, you cannot have more than 60 hours of what they call unexcused absences. Now, I want to say, during this hearing, we're not going to hear anything that Mr. Kerns didn't call in when he was going to be out. We don't hear anything. We're not going to hear any evidence that when he said he was out, he was doing something else. He's going to testify as to the reasons that he was out. He was sick, and he's going to go, I'm not going to go into that now, but he'll tell you why he was out. So, he received this notice stating that he was out for 4 days. Now, his shift is a little over 12 hours. He doesn't work an 8-hour shift. He works 1 week, he works 4 days, the next week he works 2 days. It alternates. They're long shifts. The county indicated he was out on 4 days. Now, we're going to question them on one of these days whether it should have been an absence, because technically, under their rules, if someone is out less than half a day, it's not considered an absence, and we consider one of these absences was less than half a day. However, from December until May, their record shows he was out 4 days. Now, he was issued a suspension back in July of 2015. He was not absent for 6 months after that. Then he was absent on December 31st. Then he was absent on January 24th. 4 months he was not absent. And then he was absent on May 22nd and May 27th of 2016. And then after that, he wasn't out for 2.5 months again until they issued their notice of termination on August 10 of 2016. Now, we're going to ask you to look at his overall record. And he's had issues in the past with absences. We haven't heard anything that he wasn't out because he was sick. Their rolling period, 60 60 hours in a year is about 5 days out per year. When they terminated him, during the rolling period, even looking at their figures, he was out 42 hours, less than the 60-hour period of time. Now, he's going to testify here today. He was trying very hard. He gets ill. There are times he gets ill. And we're not clear as to whether it's, in their testimony, they're saying, well, once you're on suspension and you're given a notice that you're going to be terminated, does that mean you can't be ill anymore? Or are you saying that you're out because you are, because you're not sick, you're just taking off? Again, he's going to testify as to the reasons. They're going to allege he's not following their policies and procedures, and we are going to contend during this hearing that he was trying, he does get ill at times, and obviously we're here if we thought that the county, because they're terminating somebody, that's it, that's the end of it, that's why we're here. Obviously that's not. There are other tools that we're going to show the county has, short of terminating someone, especially a 15-year employee, and we are going to see his record here today. He's had issues with absences in the past, and he did have one insubordination. Other than absences in 15 years, he had one, and he's going to explain the circumstances. Mr. Moore is correct, he did get that in January of this year where he was suspended. He'll explain the circumstances. Considering a 50, that's the only issue in his 15-year career other than absences that's come up is regarding his performance on the job. Now we're going to contend they have tools that they can use short of terminating a 15-year employee that they've used with other employees short of terminating. They can suspend someone for a longer period of time. They can put them on probation. They have something called a last clear chance that they've used with other employees, where if somebody does something, then they're terminated. They can be terminated from their job. We're going to show some of the records of some other employees here, or employee, that are equal to his or even more severe. So we're going to ask, I'm going to question them when they testify as to these policies, and I'm going to also present Mr. Kerns as a witness who's going to testify as to the circumstances that he was out. We're asking you to consider the testimony, to consider that this is, whether this is intentional misconduct, violation of their policies, whether it's that bad that he should be terminated, and we're going to contend that that is not the case. Thank you very much. All right, we'll proceed with the Navi's case.
Mr. Chairman, you should have before you a binder containing exhibits and an exhibit list at the beginning of the binder. Mr. Glazer and I have stipulated that should come in as evidence, so I just want to save some time to get that into evidence. We're gonna go through it or talk about some of the documents in it as we proceed with the witnesses. So I would like to have the binder containing essentially 4 composite exhibits. The first exhibit behind tab 1 runs from page 2 through page 45. Exhibit 2 and Exhibit 1 that I discovered is the disciplinary history containing all the notices and employee performance notices for Mr. Kerns. Exhibit 2 is the composite exhibit that contains Mr. Kerns' employee performance evaluations from the end of his probation in 2002 through fiscal year 15-16. Exhibit 3 contains Kronos records, last 3 years worth of Kronos records, and that exhibit spans pages 65 through 96. And then Exhibit 4 is the policy number 102.02 on absenteeism management. That's a 4-page exhibit spanning pages 97 through pages 100. I'd like to have those exhibits introduced and accepted into evidence. And then I will call our county's first witness is Mr. Mark Flowers. My name is Mr. Flowers. Good morning, Mr. Flowers. Tell us your name for the record, sir.
Yes, Mark Anthony Flowers,
And where are you employed?
with the Division of Corrections, Volusia County.
And is the Division of Corrections, that synonymous with the Volusia County Branch Jail?
That is,
Yeah, that's where you physically work?
yes,
Is the
that's
Volusia
where
County
my
Branch Jail? How long have you been employed with Volusia County Division of Corrections?
since May of 2014.
And you said what's your position?
I am the acting director
And how long have you been the acting director?
since March of this year.
Tell me what the acting director does.
The acting director's duties are the same as the director. The director has been placed on a special assignment, so I'm responsible for everything that the division does.
How long have you been in the corrections industry?
I just started my 34th year.
Where did you work prior to coming to, can you describe for the panel and the board, where you worked prior to coming to Volusia County?
Yes, sir. I'm a 23-year Army veteran, spent 23 years active duty, retired in 2006 as a sergeant major. Spent my entire military career as a military policeman working in prisons and jails. After leaving the Army in 2006, I went to the American Correctional Association in Alexandria, Virginia, where I was appointed as the director of National Prison and Jail Standards. I left there and went and opened a contract facility with Homeland Security, private corrections. I opened a brand new facility, and after receiving an ACA accreditation, resigned my position and then went to work for the Virginia Department of Corrections as an assistant warden at the state prison. I was recruited later and ended up going to Colorado to be their prison director. And after a short stint there, I arrived in Volusia County in May of 2014. Thank you. I forgot my other.
Mr. Flowers, can you please describe the Volusia County Branch Jail? Really what I'm asking for is, can you describe for us who's incarcerated at Volusia County Branch Jail?
Yes, sir. The Volusia County Branch Jail houses just under 1,000 inmates. And these inmates range from a petty theft to a mass murder, to include someone that may be sentenced on death row within the state of Florida. We house just under 1,000. Most of those are pretrial inmates and not yet been set in court. Probably the worst of the worst that we have in Volusia County are housed in.
And how many, do you know how many corrections officers you have in the Branch Jail?
Total in the entire division, we operate really 2 jails. We have just under 300 sworn officers.
And can you describe the work of a senior corrections officer?
Yes, sir. The senior corrections officer is the most senior officer that's on a housing unit. The these folks, supervise and interact with inmates on a daily basis, responsible for the health and welfare of our inmate population, as well as the safety and security of the institution, and responsible for providing safety and security for our staff.
And now, do you know Mr. Kerns, Richard Kerns?
Yes, sir, I do.
And Mr. Kerns was a senior corrections officer who worked out at the branch jail?
Yes, sir, he was.
Can you describe his specific duties at the jail?
Yes, sir, he was a senior corrections officer, so he performed the duties I just mentioned.
And what happens at the branch jail if a senior corrections officer is absent from duty?
I will even go a step further in regards to any officer. A senior officer, we're relying on their expertise, their service, their experience, and things of that nature. When a senior corrections officer is missing from that post, we have to pull another senior officer to cover that on the assignment, depending on which assignment it is.
And when there's an unscheduled absence, does that create any adverse effects on branch jail operations?
Yes, sir, most definitely.
Could you please describe those adverse effects?
Yes, we have a duty and a responsibility as a division of corrections in a public safety arena to not only house these individuals that have been held according to the courts, but we have to provide for their welfare. We have to make sure that they eat, make sure that they have an opportunity to shower. Anytime we have a vacant post, what we call a vacant post is where an officer is not on their assigned position. Several things happen. One of the most important for me is it increases my security concerns in regards to the other staff members. For an example, if I'm missing an officer on one post that's what we consider a critical post, I've got to pull an officer from a post that may not be as critical to cover this position, but then that leaves me shorthanded over here. And in many cases, we end up canceling recreation for the inmates, which is not something that we enjoy doing because we like giving them the recreation that they are required to have. But when you're shorthanded and you have numerous call-outs, it runs you short throughout the entire shift. Not only places the inmates at risk, it places our security staff and civilian staff at risk as well.
Does it have any adverse effect in terms of finance or budget issues?
Depending on the kind of call-out it is, if I have enough time to where I'm bringing in an officer to cover that shortage, I'm paying the other officer overtime. So there is a very high cost when we have a lot of unexcused absence or unplanned absences. We're covering those down if possible with overtime officers.
Now, what's the purpose of employee or discipline of a corrections officer?
Well, I think, with my 23-year military career and every leadership course I've ever gone to, what I learned many, many years ago is that the purpose of discipline is really to correct behavior. And it's not so much just for staff. We use the same model when we're correcting our inmate population. We're trying to correct a negative type of behavior, and it's the same with staff.
Are you familiar with Mr. Kerns' disciplinary history?
Yes, sir, I am.
There's a binder in front of you. Could you open it up? And, there's an exhibit page, or there's an index of exhibits, and then there's under tab 1, our collection of documents that comprise the better part of Mr. Kerns' disciplinary history. Could you briefly summarize for the board your understanding of Mr. Kerns' disciplinary history?
I arrived in May of 2014 and was briefed within the first week or two about Mr. Kerns because he was undergoing some discipline action and had undergone some discipline action during that time frame. So when I looked at Mr. Kerns' initial, I guess, opinion, there was a long history of absenteeism. It dated all the way back to 2003, in fact. So there, like I said, there's an extensive history, and almost everything, short of just a couple, dealt with excessive absenteeism. So,
Now, how did you become aware of this absenteeism problem?
could you be more specific, sir? This particular, there are so many, I'm not sure which.
When you came into the Division of Corrections in May of 2014, how were you made aware of that Mr. Kerns was being disciplined for absenteeism issues?
Okay, yes, sir. I was hired as the assistant director, so when the director participated in the disciplinary process, I was brought into that process. I'm new to Florida, learning how we do it in Florida as compared to some of my previous assignments was one of the reasons that I was brought in early on into Mr. Kerns' situation. And it was during that discipline process that I went back and looked at Mr. Kerns' employment file and saw the history there. My question was, why is the employee still here, quite frankly? And that was back in 2014.
Is it accurate to say that as the director, you don't initiate disciplinary actions?
No, sir. No, sir, I don't, as the director, I do not initiate it.
Who brings the issue to you?
First line supervisor, the shift captain, they will run when someone calls out, we automatically go back and we pull a 12-month rolling calendar. Our policy says anything in excess of 60 hours, you're in violation of our policy. So when someone calls out and you start noticing that they're calling out pretty frequently, we keep track of those. We run a time detail report through our timekeeping system, and it keeps track of all of the call-outs as well as the work hours in a year's time frame. And that's what generates the discipline process. The supervisor will run a check, for lack of a better term, to see where the employee is at, and then we'll elevate a recommendation for disciplinary action at that point. And that's what happened with Mr. Kerns.
Has his absenteeism issue gotten any better? Has there been any improvement since May of 2014?
I haven't noticed any improvement, no, sir.
There was a period of time following his suspension, was it not, where he was he had done better because he wasn't working overtime.
There was a I have to go, well, bear with me here just a second. I'll see if it's here. There was a period where he went 6 months and was not allowed to work any overtime. It was sort of a probation last chance type agreement. And that Mr. Kerns did appear to work at those times when he was supposed to during that 6-month period. As soon as he was allowed to start working overtime again, the same pattern became prevalent.
Okay, we'll get to the pattern. I'm going to direct your attention to Mr. Kerns' employee performance evaluations. Are you familiar with those?
Yes, sir.
What's your assessment of his employee performance evaluations? I mean, if we added up all the scores and they averaged about 75 or 76, is that a good employee for corrections, or, you know?
In my experience, we, as a profession, have different definitions of employees. You have some that are stellar performers and go out and exceed everything that they touch. You have some that we call hit the gate at 8, out the door at 4. I would say Mr. Kerns was an average employee and would fall into that hit the gate at 8 and out the door at 4. Nothing that stands out, just an average employee.
describe what happened in June of 2016 that brought Mr. Kerns' absences, unscheduled absences to your attention?
Mr. Kerns called out on a duty day, and Captain Sophie ran a time report and noticed that Mr. Kerns had not exceeded our 60-hour as policy, but had started the same pattern all over again, and had submitted a request for disciplinary action to be taken with me as the acting director. After I reviewed it, I felt that it was warranted.
And did Mr. Kerns' chain of command recommend that Mr. Kerns be disciplined?
Yes, sir, he did, and what I've implemented since March is before I'll send any disciplinary action down to what we call send it to DeLand, I meet with my leaders and discuss the employee and their actions and all of that prior to sending the information down. And all of the captains, to include the warden, supported the same recommendation.
And did you then recommend to your management at the Department of Public Protection that Mr. Kerns be disciplined?
I recommended that Mr. Kerns be terminated.
And why did you recommend that Mr. Kerns be terminated?
And I mentioned it before, but I spent 23 years in the military, and I've supervised hundreds, if not thousands, of employees. I'm finishing up a PhD program. I've got a master's program. And if I haven't learned anything at all, I've learned that I cannot change people. People have to be willing to change themselves. After you review Mr. Kerns' employment history with Volusia County, he's not only been given adequate opportunity to correct his poor performance or lack of attendance at work, he's just been truly negligent with that and had more than ample opportunity to correct his behavior. So I know as the new leader coming into Volusia Division of Corrections, I don't have a magic wand that can change Mr. Kerns. And at least 3 directors before me have worked with Mr. Kerns, to include different directors within public protection, and none of them have been able to fix Mr. Kerns' problem. I'm fully convinced that only Mr. Kerns can correct his problem, and his pattern has indicated that he's not going to be able to do that. So in my professional opinion, there is no other alternative other than terminating Mr. Kerns.
You talked about patterns of unscheduled absence. So can you describe the patterns that you've noticed?
I've noticed 2 patterns, and this isn't something that I just developed. These patterns have been repetitive over the years. Our correctional officers have a very difficult job, and they work 12-hour shifts, and they deal with people that are not fit for society based on the court's rulings. It's an extremely difficult job, and the average citizen has no idea of what our officers do. And many times for minimal pay. We don't join corrections because we get rich in this business. We join corrections to protect society. So when folks don't show up to work, it affects all of us. Our job is difficult already. We don't want to cover down on other people not showing up to work, regardless of the reason. So in this particular case here, the negative impact within the organization is huge. In fact, I heard some of his fellow officers say, it's just Kerns, nothing's going to happen. And that ultimately deteriorates your entire organization, and then other employees start acting the same way. And I have a few.
Can I just put an objection in for you a second? I don't know what what the other officer said, if they're not here.
I understand that.
Yeah, so I just want to.
Able to give it away this week, we see that.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you.
Okay, what was, can you repeat the question again, sir? I think I got off track there, but.
Madam, can you tell me what the question was, please? Oh, I asked him about patterns. I was asking about the patterns of his unscheduled absences.
Yes, I'm sorry. I've been to work since 2 this morning, so my apologies. I'm just a little bit on the tired side. But the pattern that we've noticed is on the last working day of Mr. Kerns. And I want to explain our schedule so that it's clear for you. Our correctional officers work typically 50% of the time, 12-hour shifts. They come on a Monday and Tuesday, and they'll be off Wednesday and Thursday. And then they'll work Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and be off Monday and Tuesday. So it's a 3 and 2, 2 and 3 type schedule. So what Mr. Kerns' pattern, there are 2 that we've identified. The first one is he will call in sick on the last working day of his cycle. So if he was supposed to be off, or if he was supposed to work Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, he'll call out on Sunday so that he'll be off Sunday, Monday, and then Tuesday. So when you call out on your last duty day, or the last day that you're supposed to be at work, it extends your days off, so to speak. The second pattern that we saw was he will also work overtime in that same time frame, if that makes sense. So if he will extend his days off, but turn around and make up that same time with overtime so that he doesn't lose any money within that same pay period. I know it's a little confusing because it isn't on the scheduling system, but Virginia uses the same system. It is it's pretty common in corrections. So he calls out on the last duty day and then makes up his time later on after he's had 5 or 6, maybe even 7 days off in a row. 2 patterns.
All right. I want to direct your attention to page 3. In the lower right-hand corner of the documents in front of you, you'll see a 6-digit dates number. So please turn to page 3. And for the record, these are dates we're looking at on page 3 from September 14, 2016. Notice of dismissal that we're here on today. And in table 1, it identifies 4 dates: 12/31/15, 1/24/16, 5/22/16, 5/27/16. So, are you familiar with? Before we turn to those dates, are you familiar with the Kronos timekeeping application?
Yes, sir.
If you please turn to page 87. Are you on page 87, sir?
Yes, sir, I am.
So, tell the board what the Kronos reports show for Thursday, 12/31.
Mr. Kerns called, or he actually came to work on 12/31. He worked 7 hours of that shift and went home 5 hours and 15 minutes early.
Okay, and then the next day was New Year's Day, the holiday. He didn't work. Is that accurate?
That is correct, sir. He's off on the 1st.
And is he off on the 2nd and the 3rd?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And so, does this show that he's got an unscheduled absence followed on the last day of the shift, followed by days off?
Yes, sir.
It's a partial unexcused absence on the last day of the shift, followed by days off. Is that accurate?
That is accurate.
More accurate. Okay. Let's turn to page 88. On page 88, please describe for us what the Kronos reports show for Sunday, January 24th.
Mr. Kerns called out sick on January 24th.
So this shows an unscheduled absence on January 24th. And does he work Monday the 25th or Tuesday the 26th?
No, resolve both days.
Let's go to please turn to page 90. You have page 90, sir?
Yes, sir, I am.
Now, at the bottom of page 90, tell us, does he work on Saturday, 5/21?
Yes, sir, he does.
And what kind of duty is that he does on Saturday, 5/21?
He's working at the correctional facility, which is not the branch jail, it's our second facility, and he has been assigned to South Wing, and it's an extra duty, so it's an overtime day for him.
So it shows that he worked overtime on 5/21.
Yes.
And then he calls out on 5/22 at the top of page 91. Is that accurate?
Yes, sir.
And then subsequent to that, on 5/27, what happens on 5/27?
5/27, he takes personal leave, unscheduled, once again on 5/27.
Okay. And then that's followed by another overtime day on 5/31. Is that accurate?
Yes, sir.
So does this show us that, this episode shows us that he's working, if he calls out on an unscheduled absence during the pay period, that he also worked overtime?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now I want to direct your attention to to page 20. Now, for the record, page 20 is the second page of a notice of intent to dismiss that we've heard some about already today, dated June 17, 2015. And my question is, these dates on page 20, have you had a chance to look at the Kronos notes relating to those dates?
Yes, sir.
Let's turn now to the first date in the Kronos notes, which is August 9, 2013. Please turn to page 69.
I'm there, sir.
Okay, on page 69, tell us what the Kronos report for Friday, August 9th.
Mr. Kerns called out and had unscheduled leave.
Okay. Now, if we back up to August 2nd, does it, the Kronos notes show that he was working overtime?
He did work overtime on August 2nd, yes, sir.
Okay, now please direct your attention to page 74.
Yes, sir.
Now, for the dates, Friday, April 4th, Saturday, April 5th, and Sunday, April 6th, the Kronos notes show that he worked overtime?
The 4th, the 5th, and the 6th, yes, sir, all three were overtime days.
Okay, and so we know from the notice that we just looked at that he got suspended because he called out sick on April 8th, April 10th, and April 11th. Is that accurate?
The 8th, he called out sick. The 10th, he was scheduled for overtime that didn't come in. And that is an example of leaving me a vacancy because I don't have anybody to backfill that position. And then on the 11th, yes, sir, he was absent there as well.
And then those absences are followed by another overtime day on Monday, April 14th.
Yes, sir, that is correct.
So this episode shows us that He's called out unscheduled absence from regular duty on April 8th and 9th during a period in which he worked overtime.
Yes, sir.
Okay, come over to the next page, if you will. Direct your attention to page 75. Okay, tell us what the Chronos reports show for May 13.
Mr. Kerns worked overtime on May the 13th.
Okay, and then we know from the page 20 that he got disciplined for his unscheduled absence on May 15. Is that the last day of a 2-day pay, 2 days schedule then?
The 14th and the 15th would have been his normal duty days, yes.
So then he's out on the 15th, and then he's off on the 16th, 17th, and 18th.
That is correct.
And then he's working overtime again on May 21st and May 27th, 2nd. Is that accurate?
That is accurate, yes, sir.
And then he calls out again on Sunday, the third day, the last day of a 3-day shift, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Sunday, May 25th, he calls out from regularly scheduled duty,
Yes, sir.
followed by Memorial Day.
Yes, sir.
Now, this episode in May, on page 75, shows us both patterns, does it not? That he calls out from regular duty in a pay period in which he's working overtime, and he calls out on the last day of either a 2 or a 3-day shift.
Yes, sir.
I want to direct your attention now to page 76.
Yes, sir.
Tell me what the entry in the Chronos report shows for July 10th and July 11th.
Leave without pay, unexcused absence, and what that tells me is that Mr. Kerns had exhausted all of his leave at that point, but still didn't come to work.
And in that episode, he's also followed by 2 days off, July 12th and 13th. Is that accurate?
That is accurate, yes.
And is it accurate to say that the 10th and 11th are the second and the third last day in a 3-day shift?
Yes, sir.
I want to direct your attention now to page 77.
Yes, sir.
We know from the notice back on page 20 that he was disciplined for unscheduled absence on Sunday, September 14th. Tell us what the Chronos reports show for his duty on Thursday, 9/11, and Tuesday, 9/16.
9/11, Mr. Kerns worked overtime, and 9/16, Mr. Kerns worked overtime.
We know he was absent, unexcused absence on Sunday, the 14th. Is he off on the 15th?
Yes, sir.
So, this episode in September shows us that he has an unscheduled absence during a pay period in which he's working overtime. That's one pattern. And then the second pattern is that he's calling out the last day, Sunday, September 14th, of a 3-day work shift.
Yes, sir, that's correct.
That's the second pattern. One more episode. I'm going to direct your attention now, Mr. Flowers, to page 79.
There, sir.
What do the Chronos reports show for November 5th at the top of the page?
Mr. Kerns
Then he has, what happens on Friday, November 14, and Saturday, November 15?
Mr. Kerns calls out both days.
So that's an unexcused absence during the same pay period that he's working overtime.
Yes, sir.
Also works overtime on Friday, November 21st, is that accurate?
Works overtime, yes, sir.
Are these the sorts of patterns that you're noticing with his unscheduled absences?
Yes, sir, most definitely.
You know, you testified early on about the number of corrections officers out at the Volusia County Branch Jail. You said, I don't know what the figure was, about 300 for both facilities.
Yes, sir, just under 300 both facilities.
Are you familiar with the disciplinary histories of other officers?
Some, yes.
Some meaning the ones that have been brought to your attention.
Yes, sir.
You don't go looking for officers to discipline. Is that accurate?
That is accurate, sir. I prefer to spend 90% of my time with 90% of the employees, those that do all the right things.
Did you do an assessment to determine whether Mr. Kerns is being treated fairly?
Yes, sir.
And do you think he's being treated fairly with respect to discipline administered to other corrections officers for unscheduled absences?
Yes, sir.
And can you explain to the board why you think he's been treated fairly?
I think he's honestly been treated more than fair, quite frankly. As I mentioned, I'm new to Volusia County, and my previous assignments, Mr. Kerns would not have lasted as long as he did. Corrections is, as I mentioned, a very dangerous game. And for our division, it's no different than any other employer. They want their employee